Motorsports and racing in general are one of the most popular types of sports. Formula One is without any doubt one of the prestigious of them, and it is not a surprise that across the years we had a lot of board games covering this particular topic. Does it mean that we do not need any new game dedicated to Formula One? Of course we need such games. And today a presentation of one of the most interesting and one of the newest projects which is related to this particular type of sport. Hello, this is Michel Leviathan-Sorbet and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today I invite you to take a look at a presentation of a prototype of a game which is still not released, but which will be launched soon on crowdfunding platforms and which will fight for become a real game, which hopefully will be successfully funded and which will enable us to recreate Formula One races. This will be the presentation of Formula’21GP, a game designed by Paweł Licznerski and Łukasz Kaczanowicz and which will be released by the Polish company Dax Games. Now, Dax Games is not a very new company because Dax Games already released a successful game, a game which was also funded on a crowdfunding platform, which was called Triangle Wars. Now, I have presented videos concerning Triangle Wars on my channel a few months back, both an early prototype as well as the final version in Polish and in English. So if you're interested in taking a look at how Triangle Wars looked like, I invite you to take a look at those videos. But today a game completely different, a game which will enable us to recreate Formula One races. This is a game designed for 1 to 6 players, so it will have also a dedicated solo mode. The minimum age of the player will be somewhere around 10 years or higher, and the time of play will depend on the playing mode, but it will vary from about 60 to 120 minutes. It will also depend on the number of players involved. Today I would like to show you how the elements of the prototype version of this game look, what are its core mechanics, what are its basic ideas, and at the end of the video I'd like to share with you my final thoughts, explaining what I think are the strong points of this project and what might be the weaker ones, so that you can see for yourself what to expect. So without further ado, let's check how the elements of Formula’21GP look and how the elements will be used in order to recreate a Formula One race. Here is the prototype version of Formula’21GP. As you can see, the box cover is quite impressive. I like the artwork in this game. I like in general all the components which are part of this game, even though this is still a prototype. So I'd like to show you how this game looks, underlining that this is a prototype version, and then I'd like to briefly explain also what are the core mechanics of this title. So firstly, as you can see, the most important element which we will be using before starting a game are the track tiles, which are part of the game and which enable you to create your own track. You can of course construct one of the tracks which will be present in the rulebook or on the publisher's website. I'm certain that after this game gets released, we will get also a lot of new tracks created by fans. So this is a big advantage of this design, because we have many racing games in which the tracks are already ready because they are printed on a mapboard. Here we receive the tiles, which enable us to be very creative and to create different kinds of tracks. Now, as you can see, the tiles are are tiles of different shapes, of different length, but in general, what we have on them are lanes through which the cars will be moving. We have different also symbols on some of them, because each tile has also its own distinctive number, which helps us to find such a tile when constructing a board from a prepared track. We have also some indicators, for instance, saying us that if we end movement on such a track, we will have to reduce the state of our tires, and additionally we will have to reduce our gear if we happened to move at a higher gear when entering this tile. So we have, as you can see, also chicanes, we have curbs through which we will be able to pass if we want to take such a road. Now, as you can see, we have also some special tiles. We have DRS tiles indicating the beginning and the end of the DRS zone. In this game, we have rules governing DRS, which will enable cars starting movement in a DRS zone to move faster and to try to race the cars which are ahead, still in the DRS zone. We have some special tiles with the question marks on which we will be placing event cards, because this game is not only a game in which we'll be using cars, dice will be also using cards, and a few types of them. Now, apart the tiles which will be used to form the track, each player will obviously take his own car miniature. As you can see, those miniatures are quite interesting already. In the final version, they will be even prettier with some paintings. But apart from the miniature, each player will receive also his own car board, his own panel, on which he will have to take care of setting up elements, and where he will be tracking several information. Now, on this panel, on the right side of it, we have the track where we will be controlling the tire performance. We have a counter which will be moving alongside this track, indicating the current state of our tires, which will also influence a certain modifier which will be added to our movement during our activation. On the central part of the board, we have a space for 2 additional cards. This part of the board is called the buffer, and here we will be able to stock additional cards, because normally we can have 4 cards in our hand, but we can increase the number of cards from which we can choose from by stacking them on the buffer. By the first space, as you can see, is already available from the game start. The second one is blocked, but if the energy counter is moved, it will be also unlocked. So it is possible to stock up to 2 cards. Now, this part of the panel will be used in order to track our gear and also to indicate the number of bonus of special capacities which we can use, and of our panel configuration. Depending on the type of tires that we use, and we can use 3 different kinds of tires. We can use hard tires, soft tires, and tires for rain weather. We will receive a certain number of gear counters, which will be used to create or to configure our own panel, indicating driving on which gear we will be receiving additional bonuses to our movement. Now, as you can see, each panel also has a printed special capacity, because each car in the game will be different. It will have a different ability. It will also have a slightly different tire performance track. So this is a nice addition, because not each car will be the same. Using to our advantage the special capacity will be crucial in order to move in the fastest way possible. Now, we have also the track indicating the ERS system, because we have in this game rules governing the energy recovery system, which will enable us to charge our battery and to use it to our benefit. We have also the momentum track on which we will be adding momentum points, which then can be used in order to move faster during an activation. Apart from this board, we will also prepare before starting the game, the main panel on which we will be tracking the current turn. As you can see, we can play up to 24 turns. We will be tracking also the race control. We'll be tracking the race development where we will be moving the yellow flag token indicating that a race control can happen at some time. We have also a place to store one of the weather cards, because before the game starts we will randomly draw one of the weather cards indicating what weather will be during the race. So we can have a sunny weather. As you can see, 2 types of tires will be available. We can have also a cloudy race, which indicates that we can have rain during the race, and we can start a race also instantly with rainy weather. So this weather will also influence the type of tires that will be used during the race. Normally, a standard game of Formula 21GP will take us 24 turns, but it can also last a little bit longer, because in fact the winner of the game will be the player who crosses the finish line as the first one after the turn counter reaches the 24th space. But it is also possible to lose the game even if we are the first one to cross the finish line, because during the game we can accumulate penalty points for different behaviors, for causing accidents, or maybe also for not playing event cards from our hand. And if we happen to have penalty points, it can happen that we can lose some spaces after the race ends. Now, how the game is played. I already showed you the track, I already showed you the cars and the car panels, but what remains to be shown are the cards. We have several types of cards. I have already showed the weather cards, but the core of the game, the most important element of the mechanics, are the action cards. Now, each player will have 4 action cards in his hand, and additionally he will also be able to use his cards stored in his buffer. During his activation, a player will have to play one of those cards in order to activate his car. Now, we have several kinds of action cards. We have the event cards, which in general only take place in your hand, and which can also cause you to receive penalties if you do not get rid of them very quickly. In order to get rid of them at the start of your turn, you can place such a card on the track on an empty space with the question mark. A car which ends its move on such a space will have to draw an incident card from the incident deck. Drawing such a card will tell us what the effect is. Sometimes we'll receive positive results, sometimes something bad can happen, both to us as well as to all the other cars taking part in the race. Another way to get rid of such a card is to place it on our buffer, because we can also store this card in order to not keep it in our hand. Because if we keep such a card in our hand, and we can hide such a card in our hand, if the race control takes place, we will receive a penalty marker, and this is something which should be avoided at all times. Now, apart this card, we have 3 colored cards which will indicate the speed at which we can move. We have green cards, which are the slowest. We have red cards, and finally the blue ones, which are the fastest. So in correspondence to what we have on our panel, for instance, when playing a blue card on the 8th gear, we will be moving up to 8 spaces. If we play a red card on the 8th gear, we'll be moving 6 spaces. If this is a green card, 3 spaces. To this number, we can add also certain bonuses, which are related to the current tire modifier, to the configuration of our panel. We can also move slower, charging our momentum, so adding additional points to our momentum. Because sometimes we will not want to move at our full movement allowance. The reason is that when we start our movement on a tile, we always look at the type of tile and at the gear indicated. If we start our movement from a tile with the 8th gear, we can move using the fastest possible movement rates. But if we start our movement, for instance, on a turn, we will be using only cards which will be significantly slower. So it will be crucial to end our movement on straight lines where the 8th gear will be used during our next activation. So where we want to finish our movement will not always be the tile which is the farthest away that we can reach. Sometimes it will be one of the tiles which will enable us to move at a higher gear at the beginning of our next turn. We have also on those cards special symbols indicating what kind of movement we can move, because normally to change lanes we have to use cards enabling us to change lanes. Additionally, changing lanes will require us to use our tires. We have also one special kind of card. This is the Joker card, which can replace each card apart from the blue one. Now if we have a weak hand, for instance, we have 4 green cards in our hand, and if we want absolutely to move faster than only due to the limits imposed by the green cards, we can combine those cards. Instead of playing only one card, we can play 2 cards of the same color in order to increase their power. So 2 green cards combined make 1 green card. 2 red cards will make, 2 green ones will make 1 red, and 2 red ones will make 1 blue. But there is a certain danger associated to it. Each time we decide to do it, we have to roll the danger die. There are 2 dice. One of them will be rolled depending on what kind of combination we used. And after rolling such a die, we can have some negative effects. For instance, we can use our tires, or we can draw an incident card, which can then cause us to, or we can draw a risk card, which sometimes will, for instance, cause us to have an accident, or sometimes will cause mess on the track, will result in cutting a chicane, etc. We have a lot of different results. So what I like also is the fact that even if you have some weaker cards, you can still use your card which you stocked in your buffer, or if you still have nothing in your buffer, you can combine cards of the same color in order to still move faster than you would if using only a weaker card. So after moving, we end our turn, and it's up to our opponent or opponents, so the next car takes his round. Now, one additional thing which I'd like to explain is the fact that in this game we have really a lot of elements which are meant to simulate how races of Formula 1 look. So we have the different gears, we have the different tire types, we have changing variable weather, we have the chicane curbs, we have different events. We have also the pit stops required during a race, because in a race we normally will have to enter the pit stop in order to change our tires at least once during the game. We have finally some clever rules governing overtaking, because in many racing games overtaking is very straightforward, is very simplified, and in those games in general, when we play a card, we can just pass our opponent counting a number of spaces. But here it works a little bit differently. If we have sufficient space, so if we are not close enough to our opponent, we can
use any card in order to pass our opponent, just like in many other games. But if there is no place, for instance, there is only one space alongside the car which we want to overtake, when moving to such a space, it activates a combat between both cars. And the car which is overtaken can react to such an attack. Both players can use momentum points in order to try to defend their position or to attack. So this really simulates well how races of Formula 1 look, because overtaking in Formula 1 is not extremely easy. On some tracks it's even extremely difficult. So I really like this fact that those rules were installed in the game. It adds a lot of realism. It is at the same time a nice way to simulate how a battle between two drivers looks on a track. So this is only one of the interesting elements. We have the DRS zones, so we have the ERS system, a lot of fluff, a lot of interesting elements. We also have a dedicated solo mode with bots which we can race against, or which can be added also to multiplayer games if we want to have a virtual opponent. Finally, in order to play shorter games or games which require less rules, we have Sprint, the Sprint version, in which we'll be using only certain parts of the game without, for instance, different kinds of tires, without having to stop to a pit stop, etc. So we have several playing modes in this game. So obviously this video is not a tutorial. You can find tutorials and a more detailed explanation concerning how the mechanics of the game look on the website of DAX Games. This video is rather a presentation of the prototype and a review of the prototype. So now I'd like to invite you all to the final part of this video, during which I'd like to share with you my final impressions concerning this prototype. So I'd like to explain what I like in this game, what I find are the strong points of this project, but what I also think are the things that could have been done better. So let's pass to this final part of this video.
I'd like to start this final part of the video by telling you a few words about DAX Games. Now, DAX Games is not a new company, but it is not also a company which released a lot of games. The last project of this company, Triang, was a project which I have endorsed, which I have fully enjoyed after it was successfully funded. And I must say, but basing on on my previous experiences with this company, I expect that Formula 21GP will be released in a somewhat similar way. What I mean to say is that DAX Games is a company who always listened and listens very carefully to what players and potential buyers say. The final version of Triang was somewhat different from the initial one because of feedback that this company received during conventions, during the campaign, and they listened to those voices. They created a version of the game which was very similar to the initial one, but at the same time it had some changes due to the voices raised by players. And in Formula 21GP it is also the case. I had the pleasure to play an early prototype of this game some time ago, and I must say that the new version which I presented you today and which I am referring to is quite different. It evolved due to voices, due to experience and feedback, which DAX Games gathered through all their conventions, through all their interactions with potential buyers. And this is a very good symptom. I like companies and like designers who work in this way. DAX Games doesn't rush in creating a campaign with a product which is not fully tested, which didn't receive sufficient feedback. It's not the case. They do not work in such a way, and I really appreciate such an approach. We had a lot of games released or funded on Kickstarter, then released, which at the end proved to be not sufficiently tested, or products which were only very attractive visually but mechanically weren't very entertaining. DAX Games tries to do both. They try to improve their graphic design, they try to improve the way how the elements are printed. At the same time, they are very hard working on the mechanics. And I must underline this once more. I really like this approach. This is not a big company, but it has a big heart for its product, and we can see it very clearly. Having said all that, I'd like to underline and like to share with you my thoughts concerning this particular version of the prototype, and I'd like to tell you what I think are the strong but also the weaker points of this project. So firstly, when we speak of elements, the elements for this game are modular, and I really like games with modular elements because this enables players to create tracks as they wish. They can use all the elements, they can use some of the elements, they can create different track races, and this is, in my opinion, a very strong point of this game. We have a lot of racing games in which we have only one track, in which we have boards instead of tiles. Here it's not the case. Using even additional tiles, you can create tracks as you wish. And if you don't want to create a new track, you can use the track which is presented in the rulebook. More will be added during the campaign. The elements are interesting. They, of course, are prototype elements, but if they are released at the same standard as the elements which were part of Triangle Wars, I expect high quality elements. I like the magnetic elements, although I do not know if they will be part of the final version, because some issues are related to some legal questions when it concerns to magnetic elements. Having said all that, even without the magnetic elements, the game will also be very enjoyable in terms of how different things will be manipulated during the game. When we speak of the project and the game as a whole, I think it's a good idea to create more than one playing mode. And in Formula 21GP, we have two of them. We have the base game, which is called the sprint game, and we have the full version. And it's good that we have those two modes, because the game really has a lot of elements, a lot of climatic elements related to Formula 1 racing. And using all those elements at once makes the game quite compact, makes this game quite complicated in terms of number of rules, in terms of number of elements. To be precise, it's not a game extremely complicated to be played, because once you play a game, once you see how the elements work, it becomes crystal clear. It's not that complicated, but at first glance, when looking at the rulebook, when looking at all those elements, at all those specific cases, you might have this feeling that this is an overly complicated game. So adding the sprint mode streamlines things and makes it easier to understand, to learn the game. It's a very good idea that this mode is here. Additionally, what is also a very good information is an addition of the solo mode. We can race against bots. We can even race against human players, adding a bot car, which makes the game even more entertaining and interesting. So adding the solo mode, which is, in my opinion, almost a must-have for games released nowadays, is an extremely good idea. In some projects, we do not have the solo mode, or the solo mode is an add-on during the campaign. Here it's already here, and you can use it if you want to play the game solitaire, or if you want to play a game with your friends and add a bot player in order to add something additional to the game. Now, what I really enjoy in this game is the fact that we have in it a lot of elements which are strictly related to Formula 1 racing. If you're a fan of Formula 1 races, you will really enjoy a lot of things which are strictly related to this kind of motorsport. a lot of details which are absent from many games. So we have the DRS zones in which we can use our DRS system in order to race, to move quicker than usually. We have different types of tires which depend on the weather type, because weather is also an extremely important element of the complete game. In sprint mode it's totally absent from it, but in the complete game we have also weather, which can be variable. We can have sunny weather, but we can also have clouds, which ultimately may lead to some rain. And rain, of course, changes completely the way how Formula 1 races look. And using the correct types of tires is also a very important decision. We have the ERS system, so the energy recovery system, which enable you to use additional elements, obtain an additional boost to your car. We have different kinds of cars. All the cars are different with some small changes concerning their efficiency. We have rules governing overtaking, which in many racing games are very straightforward, or even absent, because sometimes we have racing games in which you just move next, you just pass an adversary without even looking at it. It only depends how fast you move. Here, overtaking is not that simple, and if you take a closer look at how Formula 1 races look like, it will be very close to what we receive in the game. It's not that easy to overtake other cars in Formula 1 races, and this game simulates this fact. In some cases it will be more difficult to pass another player's vehicle. Additionally, this car's controller can react to it, can defend his position. This is an excellent addition to the game. This is something which is really a part of Formula 1 races. So a lot of interesting mechanics which make this game quite complex, but at the same time it makes it very climatic, with mechanisms which work well together, which are well linked, which extremely well simulate how a race of Formula 1 looks. I like also, even though we have all those elements, the fact that the game is quite dynamic. Now, in race games, it's quite difficult to grasp this dynamic, because racing is a constant process. It's clear that you have constant movement. This is very difficult to simulate in a board game. This is why computer games work a lot better when simulating such kinds of sports. Here it's more difficult, and we have race games in which the downtime kills all the fun. Here in Formula 21GP, although we have some quite climatic mechanisms which at first glance will add complexity, and you might expect it will add also playing time, in reality this game works very smoothly. It is, in my opinion, a game which found the right balance between simulating the race and still giving players a fun experience. This is not only a simulation. Now, I have reviewed a lot of games on my channel, and sometimes I have said that a game is an excellent simulation, but it's not a game, or it's a game which is not quite entertaining, because you do not have the possibility to influence the impact of the effect of the game due to some mechanics which make the game go into one very precise direction, or you have too much chrome inside which complicate the game, which makes it inaccessible, or which changes playing onto a bookkeeping experience. In Formula 21GP it's not the case. It's still a very dynamic game, at the same time using elements which make it more climatic than in many other games. Finally, what I really enjoy in this game is the way how you have to handle your cards, because this is a card game. This is a game in which you will be using cards in order to move your car. And how to use those cards, when to use those cards are really, really very important elements of the game. What I extremely enjoy is the fact that the risk of obtaining very weak hands is significantly mitigated in this game. In a lot of games, if you happen to draw weak cards, you're unable to use them to your advantage, and you are in a worse situation only due to bad card draw. Here you have a lot of elements which make such situations not impossible, but very, very improbable. Firstly, if you draw 4 events, you can instantly discard those cards and draw 4 new ones. Sometimes it happens, so it's good that such a rule is here in the game. Secondly, if you are absolutely very determined to move at a higher speed, for instance with a red card, but you do not have any red card in your hand, you can use 2 green cards. You can associate them in order to obtain the advantages of a red card. So even without such a color, you can still combine other cards in order to obtain this advantage. Of course, with a certain risk, but you still can take this decision. It's up to you. Thirdly, you can use also your cards in order to stock them in your buffer. I like this idea because it increases additionally the way how you have to handle your cards. This is all about hand management, about card management, and the way how you use those cards will be very important and will be finally impacting the final results of the race. So what I think are the weaker points of this project? What might be problematic for some of you? Firstly, when judging the elements, how they look when reviewing the prototype, I think that the information on the racing tires should be bigger, should be better presented. For instance, when I am searching for the information which number of tile I am using, those numbers are very small, those symbols are very small. The additional symbols on the curves are also very small, and sometimes it's difficult to spot them from a longer distance. I hope that those elements will be better presented on the final version of the tiles, which will be part of the final version, which will be released hopefully in some time by the company. Secondly, the incident deck. I do not know why it is called the incident deck, because the majority of the cards drawn from this deck are in fact positive ones. So I understand the reason why this is the case. It is an incentive for the players to use those cards, to play them, to play the event cards. But at the same time, if the majority of the cards are positive, why to call this deck an incident deck? It's not something which we will be extremely worried about. Maybe a change of the name of the deck will be sufficient, or maybe changing the way how those cards work also would be a nice idea. Finally, what is, in my opinion, the biggest problem of this game is the fact that at first glance, this game seems overly complicated. And this might be a problem for people, firstly, who do not like Formula 1, who do not like racing, and who are just interested by the project because they are searching for a race game, even though they are not extremely big fans of this kind of sport. But looking at this game, they might feel overwhelmed at first glance. And this might be problematic in terms of how the game will cope on Kickstarter or on Wspieram.to. It's important to underline that we do have those 2 playing modes, but that we have also the sprint mode, which is significantly easier to play, which is significantly faster to play, but at the same time it has a lot of elements which are amputated from the complete game, which is a nice simulator of Formula 1 race. So to all of you who are watching this video and who think that this game might be too complicated, I must say that it is only at first glance. The rulebook is quite long, but at the same time, this is a modular game. This is a game not only modular due to the tiles, but also due to how the rules are prepared. You can decide to play a game without the DRS rules. You can play a game without weather. You can play a game using only using only one kind of tires. It's all up to you. And this is also a very strong point of this title. This is not a game in which you absolutely have to use all rules in order to play a correct game or to have fun with it. You can still tailor the game to your own needs. So even though the game seems to be very complicated, in fact, it's quite dynamic. And to all of you who like Formula One, who like racing games, I think that all those mechanical elements which are part of the game will just make pleasure, will be something that you will enjoy. If you don't like Formula One, if you don't like racing games, you still can enjoy playing Formula 21GP, but probably using the sprint mode, which is significantly faster to play and which doesn't require to remember or to learn a lot of additional rules. So Formula 21GP is, in my opinion, an interesting project, a project which has extremely interestingly evolved across the past months, a project which will be released hopefully by a very dedicated group of people. It has interesting mechanics super well linked to the theme of the game. At the same time, it has several playing modes, it's a modular game. I think it might be a real success, and I will be keeping my fingers crossed. This was the review of the prototype of Formula 21GP, which hopefully will be released by DAX Games after being successfully funded. I hope you enjoyed this video. I invite you also to take a look at our other videos, take also a look at our Facebook and Instagram accounts. Have a terrific day, and see you next time.